All right, so here's a description of the assignment for Web 2. It's the Pay Calculator. You want to create a new web page and save it as PayCalc on your H drive. The web page should input this information. So your input is the name of the person. Say you're working at Safeway and you're trying to figure out people's paychecks. Create a little web page to help you with that. So you have the person's name, what their hourly wage is, the hours worked, and then a tax rate at a percentage for the income tax. The web page should take this information and calculate the output. In this case, the output is the gross pay. This is before you take out the taxes, and then there's the net pay. Net pay is the last thing. And what you do is you subtract the taxes from the gross pay to get net pay, which means you have to also calculate what the taxes should be. To do that, you need a tax rate. Luckily, that's one of the inputs. Now, if you want to be on the assignment, you make sure to check for not a number. Anytime you ask them for a number, you want to check that to make sure that if it's not a number, it shouldn't do anything, but it shouldn't crash either. For an A, you need to check for overtime. The way overtime works at most businesses is that if you have to work more than 40 hours a week, you get time and a half. So that's the pay calculator. So when you're designing a program, when you run a program, you know, first you put in the input, then you do the processing, right? Then you do the output. That never changes. It's always in that order. Every program you're ever going to write will have those three parts. There's the input part, there's the processing part or phase, the output part or phase. Okay, those are the three. But this is the worst order to go about writing the program. When you're actually a computer programmer, what you need to think about first is the output. Then you have to go, what input do I need to create the output? And then lastly, how do I transform the input into the output? So the phases are a little bit different when you're programming. So let's look at that here. What are the outputs? Well, the gross pay and the net pay. Those are our outputs. So in order to calculate the gross pay and net pay, I need to know some information from the user. So that's what we think about next, is what input do I need to create the output? Well, I'm going to need to know the hours worked, the hourly wage, and the tax rate. If I don't have that information, I can't figure out the gross pay or net pay. So that's the input part. So what are the algorithms? How do I actually transform these inputs into the output? Well, here's the equation for gross pay. Here's the equation for taxes. Here's the equation for net pay. So again, when you're writing a piece of software, you start with the output. Then you go, what input do I need to create that output? And then finally, what processing do I need to do to transform the input into the output? So when you're designing, I put coding on the screen, but or on the board, but that's probably not right. I would say design. When you're trying to design a solution, always start with the output. That drives whatever else you're going to be making. Okay? So you want to create a web page that has fields in it that will, and controls that will allow you to enter this information and also display the results. You also need a calculate button. So for the transformation part or the processing part, you want to declare all the variables you're going to need up at the top of the function, like wages and stuff. Next, you want to grab values from the form and store them into the input variables. When you're doing this, you also have to verify the user's entry. If you ask for a number and they didn't put a number in, or they just left it blank, you need to check for that. You can't assume that your user is very intelligent. Wow. Yeah, it's terrible. Now programmers kind of dark humor, they call it idiot proofing. What you do is you take your keyboard, and the user should be able to smash their keyboard or head on the keyboard 5 or 6 times and then press enter, and your program shouldn't crash. Okay? So idiot proof. Please put in your name. They put in a number. Please put in your age. They put in a name. Assume, and it sounds really harsh, but assume that your user's an idiot. Terrible. So just because you ask them for a number doesn't mean you're going to get a number back. So you got to check for that. You want to perform calculations using the variables now that you've got them filled in and they're all are valid. And then you put your output results in variables onto the form. So you've done all the processing now. Now you're ready to show the user what was calculated, and now they can see the result. Okay, so just again to reiterate, this is the assignment. A lot of people say, well, Mr. V, can you show me what the user interface should look like? And I'm not going to do that. That's up to you to decide. It needs to be able to do all these things, but you also have to remember the stuff we use in Web 1, how to make it look nice, use nice colors, things like that, maybe some pictures of money and stuff, I don't know. Make it a little bit more compelling than just a bunch of controls on a white form. Now the overtime calculation is a challenge. You'll have to sit down and think about that, because to do that equation, there's a couple gotchas in there that unless you think about it relatively deeply, you're not going to get that one right. So do spend some energy on how to figure out overtime. So if you haven't turned in your survey assignment, finally we get to turn that in. And once you're done with that, you can start working on the payroll program.